Define the problem, scope, and scan. We'll first start this mini lecture with a conversation about defining how you go about defining the problem, and I will close it with a few additional tips to help you with your writing. So first, when you're writing the problem statement, you want to make the case for why change is warranted. You'll describe the details of the problem, the who, what, when, where, and then describe the associated issues. Now, associated issues and conditions are often, they could stand alone as problems on their own, but they are just contributors to the problem you're focusing on. To give you an example, so homelessness is often associated with mental health. So we know that mental health could be its own problem and be analyzed independently, but it contributes to the problem of homelessness. So you want to identify what are those associated conditions. You also want to depict the scope of the problem. Now, your text is saying use the deficit and excess approach. You could do that. So the example here is majority of Americans are negatively impacted by no-knock warrants. Now, if only a few Americans were negatively impacted, then obviously the scope would not warrant change, right? So you do want to take a hard look at the scope of the problem and make sure that there's enough magnitude there to warrant change. And now documenting the need for change. That's going to be important. You're basically making the case of why we should focus on this problem or your focal problem. So how do you document change, the need for change? You want to document the size of the problem. 10,000 people are impacted yearly. 20,000 people are impacted yearly out of a population of 30,000. Try not to allow your own perceptions to inflate the issue beyond what the numbers tell you. So don't let your own biases creep in. You also want to set reasonable boundaries for your analysis. So as you're describing the problem, don't try to describe the entire universe. Try to pick a scope, a level of analysis that is manageable for the time that you have in this course. Be clear about the difference between private problems and public problems. Private problems are basically issues that I would have with a next door neighbor, but no one else is impacted, right? So it's a problem, but it doesn't impact the public in a broad way. So public problems often, again, that word magnitude, the scope is larger and goes beyond an individual need or problem. I'm going to skip down here to this discussion question. I hope that you will try to tackle some of these questions as you develop your problem statement with your group, because I think they'll help give you some frame. So if there is a significant decrease in the number of those newly infected by HIV, do we have a need for change or a problem? So just put me on pause and try to answer that as a group. And if I wasn't put on pause, here's the answer. It's a trick question. If we are already addressing a problem and we see a decrease, there's not a need for a change in the policy approach. However, it is still a public problem. So this example highlights key factors. We can identify public problems, but if there's no magnitude of the impact or number of folks being adversely affected, then it's not a public problem. So you need to have it identified as a problem. We've given you much of how to do that. And you need to have magnitude. But even when you can deem something as a public problem, you must ask the question, does it warrant change? You have to dig deeper. So I want you to, as you're drafting your problem statement, to use the textbook from 348 and 445. Both textbooks provide a nice solid way to go about formulating a problem statement. So you also want to describe the history of the problem. See page 41 in the Welsh and Harris text. What are the changes to nomenclature, the actors? Over time, was the problem mostly impacting Mexican communities and now is it impacting Dominican communities, or both? Depict what that has looked like over time, and try to document critical events and not all events. One example would be if you're focusing on civil rights legislation, obviously you'll want to mention the civil rights legislation of 1964, but maybe not the legislation from 1961, right? So just think about what iterations of the legislation you need to summarize when you're describing the problem, but at minimum, hit the key events in the timeline. So ask this question in your group as well. How do you determine what is critical and what is low priority? Hint, hint, magnitude. Now, examine potential causes to the problem. Briefly explain the causes without jumping to conclusions or offering up solutions right away in the problem statement. What you're doing if you do that is you're exposing yourself as a biased analyst. So please do not do that. Try to use some of the theories that you've come across in your previous courses, like broken windows, to flesh out your description of the causes. And then the scope of the analysis, is this at the individual level, group level, structural? If it is structural, often it's a national issue. It crosses borders, state borders. Now within your group, try to also ask this question because I think it will help you frame your problem statement. At what level should we analyze? In this case, I said excessive force in local policing, but just insert your problem that you're attempting to focus on. So at what level should we analyze recidivism in New York State, right? So at what level, and then your problem, insert your problem. So just go over a few more additional tips and we're done. You have limited space to write the problem statement, approximately 2 pages, single space. So please avoid commentary and stick to the facts. If you're saying I, we, then you're doing it wrong. Be succinct in your writing and validate all your facts. So if you know it's a fact and you got it from somewhere else and it didn't generate from your mind, make sure it has a citation behind it. You're working as a team, so be open to the feedback of your team members and contribute. And again, refer to both of the textbooks as you draft your problem statement. Good luck.